In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Good evening. We're continuing our Bible study. We're in 2 Corinthians, and today we're studying chapter 11. And in chapter 11, it's getting close to the end of 2 Corinthians. One of the things in chapter 11 that St. Paul, you're going to find that St. Paul is doing is he's telling them that, I usually don't, St. Paul is saying, I'm not supposed to boast, and it's actually folly for St. Paul to boast, but he's going to do it in order to bring home a specific point. And we're gonna study, and but this is what he's going to be doing, and that's how he starts in chapter 11. So he starts out, he says, "Oh, that you would bear with me. Just bear with me a little folly." And in other words, play along. Play along from what am I going to be talking to you about? What am I going to be communicating to you? So, and that's the things that he's posting. And here, what they were saying is they were comparing him to the Judaizers or the false teachers of that time. The false teachers abused the Corinthians. In a sense, they even physically abused them. We'll find out at the end of chapter 11. And they took advantage of them. And then, and it took a lot of their possessions. And St. Paul, on the other hand, he chose not to take anything from the Corinthians. He chose not. Even when he was in need, he made it a point that he's not going to take anything from the Corinthians. Even when he was in need, somebody from Macedonia, Silas, and Peter came and assisted him when he was really in need, when he was in Corinth. But he made it a point that he does not take anything from the Corinthians. And he has good reasons for that. But then the Judaizers were abusing the Corinthians, they were taking their possessions and abusing them physically. And then the Judaizers told the people of the Corinthians, "Oh, St. Paul is not taking anything, any of your donation or anything, because he does not love you." So this is the premise of this chapter. And here he's telling them, okay, I'm gonna explain this to you a little more, but play along, just like a little folly. And indeed, just bear with me. And then in verse 2 he says, "For I am jealous for you with godly jealousy." Not for possession or material, but it's a godly jealousy. "For I have betrothed you." In other words, here he's telling them that I betrothed you to the one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin of Christ. In other words, what St. Paul is telling them is that the reason I came for my ministry is ultimately for you to be betrothed to Christ. So to understand the word betrothal, of course we know that St. Mary was betrothed to St. Joseph. There was no consummation of the wedding, but there was just basically the betrothal. So the way that they used to work out these things in the old days in that culture, first it was an engagement. What is an engagement? It's basically a promise to marry. A promise that one day we'll be married. Okay, so that's the engagement. And then comes a time where there will be a betrothal. At that time, betrothal was almost equivalent to what we have today as a civil marriage. But it's not consummated. And then the third stage of that process is the actually wedding, which is the consummation of the marriage. So in other words, engagement is basically, there's a promise that one day we'll be married. Betrothal, it's just like as if they are married, they have the rights of as legal husband and wife, but no consummation yet. And then comes later a wedding, this is when the consummation is. To give you an example of how is the church compared to with the church is the bride and Christ is the bridegroom in this process. So right now we're in the betrothal area, where when we have our engagement between us and God is that when I believe in Him. Once I believe in Him, then there is a promise that we will get married one day, that the bride and the bridegroom will be married one day. What is the betrothal? Just like the civil marriage, it's actually the baptism. When we're baptized, and it's just like a civil marriage where we are His betrothed, the church, the virgin bride of Christ, always referred to as the church, is betrothed to the bridegroom. When is the consummation? When is the wedding? We see it in Revelation is after Judgment Day, and that's eternal life, and that is the consummation. That's the relationship between us and God. So here what he's telling them, that my goal as a minister of the Lord to you, Corinthians, is to betroth you, which is the baptism, to betroth you to the one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. So it's like that's the baptism part. It's like a contractual binding agreement that now there's one day there will be the wedding, and that's the consummation. And then verse 3 he says, but I fear lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. So he's telling them that my goal is to betroth you to Christ, to that one husband, so I can present you as a chaste virgin. But I'm afraid that just like the serpent deceived Eve, because that's the serpent's tool, is deception throughout ages, and we will continue, that's his tool, that's a big thing in his toolbox, is deception. He's afraid that the serpent will deceive the Corinthians just like he deceived Eve by his craftiness. And how is he doing that? Is using the Judaizers, using these people, the false teachers, to deceive them from the faith. And he's worried that their mind may be corrupted and stray away from the Lord and from the simplicity of that is in Christ, which is that single-minded devotion to Christ, where they're focused only on Christ, not on the rituals and the things of the law that enslaved those who are in the Old Testament. Because that's what the Judaizers were teaching. We're teaching that you cannot be saved unless you do the law, you fulfill the law. But the reality is you're saved by grace in the baptism, and after that there's fruit of that salvation, whereas our works. And then verse 4 he goes on and he says, for if he who comes preaches another Jesus whom we have not preached, or if you receive a different spirit which you have not received, or a different gospel which you have not accepted, you may well put up with it. You may well put up with it. In other words, what they were doing is that they were accepting the Judaizers. They were coming and they were teaching them different things by telling them, you need to follow the law. This is one of the big things, and all the rituals of the law. And he's telling them, these people coming and preaching to you different things that I taught you, and you receive them. And then different gospel, perverted version of the gospel, and you're accepting it. And you're putting up with that. And he's telling them that you're doing that with the Judaizers. And in verse 5 he says, for I consider that I am not at all inferior to the most eminent apostles. Because they started saying that St. Paul we discussed it last week, that he is weak when he's present with them, but then in his letters he's very strong. So the Judaizers started referring to themselves as the eminent, the higher apostles, above St. Paul. So here he's telling them, for I consider that I'm not at all inferior. Yeah, he's not inferior to these Judaizers. He's not less than the Judaizers. And then in verse 6 he says, even though I am untrained in speech, and so he's telling them I may not be very as eloquent as these Judaizers, I'm not untrained in speech, yet I am not in knowledge. When it comes to knowledge, I have very good knowledge. Yes, I may not be eloquent as the Judaizers, but when it comes to knowledge, I have the true faith, and I'm sure that I'm still in that. One thing that you want to remember about Corinth and Greece in general, it was the hub for philosophers. When you look at all the Socrates and Aristotle, and all these people were in there in Corinth, and it was very known for them to have negotiations and talk and debate things. So there were a lot of philosophy that was going on, and a lot of things that are communicated eloquent. And here St. Paul is telling them it's not going to be, I'm not trained when it comes to speech. I'm not as eloquent as they are. But I have the true knowledge. But we have been thoroughly manifested among you in all things. In other words, the gospel that he brought to them, which they believed on and they were baptized in, is basically that's what they believe, and it's manifested. The fruit of that is manifested already among the Corinthians. It's just that now, when the Judaizers started deceiving them, they started straying away from that gospel they originally believed, and that gospel that St. Paul originally instilled in them. And then verse 7 says, did I commit sin in humbling myself that you might be exalted, because I preached the gospel of God to you free of charge? So he's telling them, is that a sin for me? That I am humble like for instance, when I am with you, I am humble, I am gracious, I am not hard, and I'm not chastising like the others are. But he's loving. He's saying that it's not a sin for me to be humble, that you might be exalted, because I preach the gospel of God to you free of charge. And here he's telling them that I didn't take anything from it. And this is the point. He's going to go into more detail. He didn't take any monetary from the poor. But when you read in the book of Acts, chapter 18, you'll find that St. Paul provided for his own needs. In other words, he was a tent maker. He worked with his hands and he preached. So he didn't depend on donations or people. So especially the Corinthians, he says that free of charge. Is that a sin for me to bring you the gospel of God to you free of charge? Because they're comparing him to the Judaizers, which they were taking stuff from them, and they were telling them, oh, St. Paul is not taking their tradition because he doesn't love them. And then he goes on in verse 8, he says, I robbed other churches, taking wages from them to minister to you. And he's being, by the way, sarcastic here a little. That, here, because Macedonia, the church of Macedonia was providing a little bit from it for him. I robbed other churches, taking wages from them to minister to you. And when I was present with you, and in need, I was a burden to no one. In other words, when he was living in Corinth and he was in need, he was not a burden on anyone. For what I lacked, the brethren who came from Macedonia supplied. Who were the brethren? The fathers teach us it was Silas and Timothy. St. Silas and Timothy were the ones, the brethren that came and provided for St. Paul's needs. And he says that those who were in Macedonia came and supplied. And then he goes on, he says, and in everything I kept myself from being burdensome to you, and so I will keep myself. In other words, he did not depend on them, and that's not going to change. He says, I will keep myself, and that's not going to change. And then verse 10 says, as the truth of Christ is in me, no one shall stop me from this boasting in the regions of Achaia. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows. So he's telling them here, now he's going to start telling them about, he knows that he's not supposed to boast, but to bring a point so they can come back and become faithful to God and faithful to their faith, he's going to compare himself to the Judaizers. And he says, I know that I'm not supposed to do that, and that's not from God, that I ought to be boasting, but I need to do that so it will be clear who is the true disciples. Who are the ones that are bringing you the true faith? Is it me or this Judaizers? And he's going to start talking to them about the reality. He's not boasting, he's sharing them facts of what he's got through. And he says, why? Because I do not love you? God knows. And he's telling them, God knows that I love you. And no matter what you do, I will still love you, Church of Corinth. And then he's going to give them the reason now. In verse 12 he says, but what I do, I will also continue to do, that I may cut off the opportunity from those who desire an opportunity to be regarded, just as we are in the things of which they boast. So here he's telling them that I'm going to tell you these things, so not to give opportunity for people to say they are true disciples of the Lord, and they're really fake disciples. They're false teachers. And they're just being heavy burdened financially on you, and they're not really the true faith. And then in verse 13 he goes on and says, for such are false apostles, those who come and they regard as, they just basically taking an opportunity to take advantage of it. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And now he's going to talk to them more about that. And he says in verse 14, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. So he's telling them that even Satan is able to transform himself into an angel of light. So these people, those Judaizers, the devil is using them, Satan is using them to transform them, to make believe that they are servants of the Lord or true disciples of the Lord. And he says, no wonder. Even Satan himself is able to transform himself. So, that Satan is able to transform these false teachers to come across as their teachers, disciples of the true gospel. And verse 15, therefore, it is no great thing if his ministers, his meaning Satan's ministers, therefore, it is no great thing if Satan's minister, also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness. So here he's saying that that's not a great, it's not a surprise that if Satan is able to transform himself into angel of light, he's able to transform these to minister, to look like ministers of righteousness. And then he says, whose end will be according to their works. In other words, that their end is going to be according to their works. And that's how we're going to be judged, is that we're going to be judged according to their works. We're saved by the grace of God and by the sacrifice, but ultimately our judgment is according to our works. And that's why in the liturgy we say, according to your mercy, O Lord, and not according to our deeds. So that's why we say that, because the judgment is according to our works, but salvation, to enter into that salvation, is by grace and by being baptized in Christ. So here he's telling them that, Satan is able to transform to an angel of light, and he's able to use these Judaizers to look like rich ministers of righteousness. And then in verse 16, he says, but by the way, one thing to remember is that when you look at the history of the church, Diocletian did not divide the church. He persecuted the church, but that did not divide the church. What divided the church was the false teachers. These are the ones that brought heresies and started dividing the church, such as Arius and Eutychus and all these the heresies. So really, the Judaizers, it's a very big theme for St. Paul is teaching them that, these false teachers, eventually, these false heresies became the source of the division. It wasn't a persecution. Actually, when you study the history of church, you'll find that the persecution strengthened the church. The more persecution, the stronger the church. And you see even close, the year where New Year's, there was a bombing in a church. Then everyone was thinking, it's January 7th and Christmas, the churches are empty. And only to everybody's surprise, the churches are much fuller than had it not been for what happened in the bombing of the New Year's. So persecution actually strengthens the church. It's the false teaching is the one that divides the church. And this is why here he's very strong on the false teachers and the Judaizers. Verse 16, he goes on and he starts talking to them about comparison between him and these false teachers. Verse 16, he says, I say again, let no one think me a fool because I'm boasting. Don't think that I'm a fool because I'm boasting. I'm just giving them this so it'll drive a point home that I care about your faithfulness and you need to identify who is the true disciples. I say again, let no one think me a fool. If otherwise, at least receive me as a fool, that I also may boast a little. So, just accept, play along, accept it as if I'm a fool and I'm going to accept it but ultimately for your faithfulness, I'm okay with that. Verse 17, what I speak not according to the Lord. That boasting that he's going to talk about right now, it's not according to the Lord. He's saying this is not according to the Christian way of humility, but I need to do that because I need to clarify it. I speak not according to the Lord, but as it were, foolishly, in this confidence of boasting. Verse 18, he says, seeing that many boast according to the flesh, I also will boast. For you put up with fools gladly, since you yourself are wise. Because Corinthians, they usually are wise, and one of the things in their philosophy, they would put up with people that may come as fools, and they would still debate and give and talk. And he says, well, it looks like you guys put up with fools sometimes when you're talking about philosophy. So let's put up with, play along. Verse 1, he says, For you put up with it if one brings you into bondage, if one devours you, if one takes from you, if one exalts himself, if one strikes you on the face. So here he's explaining to them that, from with the Judaizers, you're putting up with them. You're putting up with them. They're putting you in bondage. And how they're doing that is by telling them that you need to follow the law. And basically what these Judaizers and the false teachers are putting them into bondage of the law. And that's not what, so here it's saying that the Judaizers, if you're putting up with them, they're putting you in bondage. They are devouring you, taking your possession. If one takes from you, in other words, taking things from them. If one exalts himself, they always used to put themselves higher and everyone else down. And then here it says that if one strikes you on the face, so apparently the Judaizers were rough with them, they would strike the people on the face. And here he's telling them that they're doing these things to you, and they're calling themselves ministers of righteousness, and you're putting up with them. And in verse 21 he says, To our shame, I say that we were too weak for that. In other words, it's saying it's shameful that you're putting up with that, and that you're looking at us as weak, because they were talking to him about in his letters, in his presence he's weak, but in his letters he's strong. But in whenever anyone is bold, I speak foolishly, I am bold also. So in other words, I am bold when it's necessary, I have to, and I will be bold. And in verse 22 he says, he's comparing himself to the Judaizers. He says, Are they Hebrews? Well, I am Hebrew too. So am I. Are they Israelites? Well, so am I. Are they the seed of Abraham? So am I. Not only that, by the way, when you look at St. Paul, he's not just the seed of Abraham physically, but he's also the spiritual seed of Abraham, because we as the church, we are the spiritual seed of Abraham. We're not the physical descendants. Well, we're not like the Israelites or the Jews. No, we are the spiritual. So here it's saying, St. Paul is saying, are they the seed of Abraham? Well, am I? And the point that I'm making is that he's not only the physical seed of Abraham, but he's also the spiritual, just like the church is, because we have the faith of Abraham. So he's saying, I am too. And in verse 23, are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool, I have more. In labor, and now he's going to tell them why, and he's going to say, what did they go through as ministers of the Lord, ministers of righteousness? And now he's going to list to them what St. Paul experienced and lived for the gospel. What did he go through, and what did he suffer from in order for him to bring them the gospel freely to the church of Corinth? So here it's saying, I speak as a fool, I am one. Okay, now let's look. In labors more abundant. When you look at the labors of St. Paul and you read about his missionary trips, 3 missionary trips, and then you can read about them in the book of Acts. In stripes, 5 times he was given stripes. He was hit. He was hit stripes, and the way they used to do it is to be fair. The order is to be 40 stripes, but in case they misnumbered, so they always go one less, 39. So 5 times he received the 39, and you can read about it, and actually a little bit later in verse 24, 25, he's going to take 5 times that he received 39 stripes, above measure. In prisons, more frequently. You can look in this many times he was enthroned in prison because of the faith. St. Clement tells us that St. Paul was in prison 7 times for nothing else but preaching the Lord. by being the true disciple that he is. In prison, more frequently. And he's telling them, these Judaizers, how many times did they actually get in prison? In death, in other words, in danger, many times he was in danger. And then in verse 24, he was persecuted from his own people, from the Jews. 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. And this is why we say 39 Kyrieleisons, and we say that Christ was whipped 39 times, because that was the way that the Jews did things. It was the order to be 40 stripes, but then they would actually whip 39 times to be fair, that if they miss something, so they're still okay. And here from the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. We read about it, by the way, we read about this law in Deuteronomy 25, 23, chapter 25, verse 23. And then he goes on and he says, for more suffering, the stuff that he's boasting about, that he's telling them that I went through that, and I had that to prove to them that I'm the true disciple of the Lord. Verse 25, he says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. And this is the Roman way, by the way. The whipping was the Jewish way, and then the rods and the stoning is the Roman way. And he says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. And you read about him in one of them, for sure it's in Acts 16, you read about it. And then he goes on, he goes, once I was stoned, and you read about that in Acts 14:19. And he was stoned once. That's also the Roman one. 3 times I was shipwrecked. And you read about them many, that was in the way to Italy. When he was moving to Italy, one of them, he was shipwrecked. And then he says, a night and a day I have been in the deep. In other words, he was stranded in the midst of the water, in the deep water, night and day. And all this because nothing else but to spread the word. In journeys, many countries, I went to many countries, in journeys often, in perils, in other words, in storms of waters. It says in perils of water. In other words, in the middle of storms in the seas and the ocean, I've been in there. In perils of robber, and that was whenever people used to travel, there was a high risk of thieves coming on them and robbing them. It goes many times. In perils of robbers. In perils of my own countrymen. In other words, his own people were persecuting him because of his faith. The Jews themselves persecuted him. Not only the Jews, but even the Gentiles. He says, in perils, even the Gentiles, the Romans are also persecuting him. In perils in the city, in the perils of the wilderness, in perils of the sea, pirates and so on. In perils among false brethren, the Judaizers used to also persecute him. In weariness and toil. One of the things is that we know about St. Paul, he had an eye disease, where he needed help always wherever he went because of his eye disease. So he's always worried, and there's a lot of toil, a lot of hard work. In sleeplessness often. In other words, many nights he was preaching until very late, and for nothing else but to spread the word of God. In hunger and thirst. In other words, here, in involuntary hunger. In other words, it's not like a fasting. He's involuntary hunger and thirst. But he did it for the gospel. But then also in fasting often. This is voluntary hunger now. In fasting often. In cold. When he's traveling, I'm sure he didn't have a whole lot, and sometimes it was cold and suffered from coldness and nakedness. Beside the other things, what's come upon me daily. He goes, so here, I'm just giving you a picture of what I go through to preach the Word of God, and for no other purpose but to present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. And here he's telling them, what did the Judaizers do? He's telling them, I don't want to boast, but I'm just going to give you a sample of what I, go through to serve the Lord as a bond servant of the Lord. And not only all these things, but every day there's things. Besides the other things, what comes upon me daily. My deep concern is for all the churches. He's telling them that all I'm concerned is about is the church and the salvation of the people in the church, that he would betroth them to one husband and present them as a chaste virgin to the bridegroom Christ. So here he just gave what, besides the other things that come in, my deep concern is for the churches. So now he's telling them in verse 21, who is weak? So he's telling them, you guys are calling me weak. Who is weak? And I am not weak. Who is made to stumble? Who's the one that's causing you to stumble? And I do not burn with indignation. I'm not the one who are putting all this pressure and bringing you a false message from the Lord and for using you and abusing you and all that. Who is the one that is weak? And then verse 30 closes the chapter. It says, look, if I'm going to boast, I'm going to boast in my weakness. And he's going to give him one thing that happened to him that he regrets. and you'll read that right now. That he's going to boast in the weakness. He goes, if I'm going to boast, I'm going to boast in one thing, and that's in my infirmity. And you read about it in the book of Acts here, whatever that he's going to go over right now. It says, for I must boast, I will boast in the thing which concerns my infirmity. His weak point. And he's going to tell him what happened, that weak point that he's kind of embarrassed from. In verse 31, he says, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who blessed forever, knows that I'm not lying. I'm not lying about all these things that I've went through. That these things are real, and there's no doubt that I've gone through this. But there is one time, and this is in verse 32, and this is at the beginning of his ministry, by the way, almost right after he was baptized and he got his eyesight back and he received the faith. So here in verse 32, he's going to tell him, well, in Damascus, the governor, under Aretas the king, he was guarding the city of the Damascenians with a garrison. So in other words, there was one point, this is when right after he was baptized and he's new Christian and everything, the governor found out that this man Saul became Paul, and now he is baptized, and now he believes in the risen Christ, and he's preaching. So this governor of Damascus wanted to get him, to persecute him or to kill him or to do something to him. So here he's saying, he guarded the gate of the Damascenians with a garrison, like guards, desiring to arrest him. And here's what he's ashamed of. In verse 33, it says, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped from his hands. This is really cool. So he said what happened was, in the old days, they used to, like in the walls of the city, they would build up to the walls of the city. And as they build, there usually would be windows in the buildings and so on. So Damascus was all under siege, and everybody is looking, and there's the governor put a garrison in the gate of Damascus. And so everybody's looking for Saul. But what Saul did, he went into one of the apartments that was nearing the wall of the city, and he went up, and from the window he was dropped down outside the city by a basket. And here he's saying, well, this is, if I'm going to boast in my infirmity, this is one thing. In other words, he felt like he should not have escaped the persecution. He should have went into the Damascus and to tell to the governor, hey, I am here. But he fled. So here St. Paul is telling him, well, if I'm going to boast, I'm going to boast in my infirmity, and I have to tell you this happened to me, and I'm kind of ashamed of it. And here basically he closes the chapter, and he's telling them that I'm going to boast in my infirmity, and especially this situation. And the whole goal is that not that St. Paul is boasting, but he's basically trying to tell them, don't follow false teachers. And he's explaining to them, in sharing with them what he's done by the grace of God for the gospel, and it's nothing for his own gain, but for the salvation of the churches. And his care was about the churches. Any questions, anybody? Any questions? And glory be to God forever.
Make us worthy, O Lord, to pray thankfully. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation. Deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord. Thine is the kingdom, power, glory forever. Amen. Now the love of God the Father, the grace of his only begotten Son, our Lord God and Savior,